we're joined by a former media member, journalist from the Daily Signal. We're here with Margaret, that is her real name, Olahan. She's a senior reporter over there, and she covers culture and politics. And so we're happy to have her, but she does have a focus, Mary.
I do, yes. So I just wrote a book on transgender issues.
Yeah.
I am, yeah. And I cover a lot of culture issues, so abortion, marriage, family, gender. I have a lot of siblings, and so I have definitely focused a lot on issues that touch on the innocence of children, because I just really feel like recently our culture has really fixated on kids and their sexuality and their gender in very inappropriate ways. And so a couple years ago, I started doing a lot of reporting on the transgender surgeries, procedures, hormones, puberty blockers for kids, because I noticed the mainstream media was basically trying to tell us that this wasn't happening. And so I started diving into it. I started speaking with young people who had tried to go through these procedures, and I realized not only was the media trying to cover up that this was happening, but they knew that it was happening, and they were working with activist groups to claim it wasn't. And so I thought, what is the best way to expose this? What's the best way to shine a light on this? And the more I talked to detransitioners, I realized, oh, these people lived this. These were young people who tried to do the unthinkable, to, go from being a girl to being a boy, or a boy to being a girl, and then realized this is impossible because you can't do that. And now they have to live with the life altering consequences of that. So in my book, I'm not commentating. I'm just saying, here's my interviews with these young people. They lived this. Here's, I want the American public to read it and decide for themselves, do you support pushing kids down this path? Because here's how this actually goes. And now decide for yourself.
Pushing kids down the path. Explain how that's happening.
Yeah.
And how significant of a problem? What's the sample size? What is it? Is it 3 kids? Is it 3,000 kids? Is it 3 million kids? What's the sample size that we're dealing with here?
This is a huge issue, and the sample size changes everywhere. But there are thousands of young people in the United States, more than thousands, that identify as transgender. Okay. And, the current situation is, let's say your daughter, I don't know if you have children.
I have a son.
Okay, let's say it's happening more with girls. So I'm going to give the example of a daughter. Let's say your daughter comes to you and she's 13 and she says, Dad, I'm not actually a girl, I'm a boy. And my counselor says that I'm not going to be happy unless I start taking testosterone. So you think, what? This is my beautiful daughter. I've known her whole life. I know she's not a boy. Why would she say such a thing? But, you might not be politically in tune. You might not really understand the issue. So the average American parent will take their daughter to the doctor or to a therapist and say, she thinks she's a boy. What should we do? And the therapist or doctor, unfortunately...
that can be a barrier.
Yes. Yeah, what they'll say is, oh, if your daughter thinks she's a boy, then she's a boy. Which is, I'm going to be a little bit overview here. Let's just say that you're a doctor who believes in this stuff, but you want to be fair. You should, at the bare minimum, talk to the child, check and see if they have any mental health issues, check and talk to them at least. But no, the standard now is if the child thinks they're trans, then they're trans. And what they tell parents, and this gives me chills every time I say it, they say, if you don't allow your child to get so-called gender-affirming care, which is puberty blockers, hormones, and surgery, your child will either hurt or kill herself. And the line they give is, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son?
So what I'm hearing you say is a couple of things. Yes, parents are often shocked.
Yes.
When they hear the news, or by the way, kudos to the child that goes to their parents and says, I think I'm a boy, or I think I'm a girl and I was born out. That takes a lot of courage to do, number one. Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing you say is that, yes, parents get shocked, but then are we not to believe the 13-year-old or you said 13, so I'll stick with that.
Yeah.
It's 13, you're a teenager, kind of.
Yeah.
You're old enough to be around, I guess, to know.
Yeah.
Are we not to believe the 13-year-old girl who feels a different way?
Well,
We're not going as extreme. I'm not going as extreme to say, oh my God, I woke up as John and I'm Jane. But if I'm feeling a certain way, are we not, as parents and loved ones, supposed to listen to the 13-year-old?
Well, I think, as adults, we know that oftentimes teenagers or kids will feel a certain way and it's completely made up. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be kind to them and to love them and show them empathy. But at the same time, we can be realistic and say, no, honey, you're not a boy, you're a girl. And I think that, that is a lot of parents' instinctive reaction. But unfortunately, social media just really revs these kids up. And so they're being inundated with this content that's very confusing. They're talking to gender activists online who are telling them, don't tell your parents X, Y, Z. You are trans. If your parents tell you you're not trans, they hate you and they want you dead. And it's this very extreme. Yeah. It's this very manipulative, and I would even say cult-like atmosphere in which kids are being pushed down this path. Now, I personally think that no one should try and go down this path. I think, based on my research, that it's harmful to everyone who goes down this path. But I think at the bare minimum, we could all agree that children under the age of 18 certainly should not be going down this path, largely because they can't give informed consent. So, and I'll give an example here. We recently found out that these transgender doctors at WPATH, they knew that these hormones that they're giving to kids, specifically to girls, were causing infertility in girls. They knew that some of these girls had such serious mental health issues that they couldn't actually consent to these procedures. In one case, one of these girls underwent a double mastectomy while she was a teen, and this is very common. And this girl told the doctor afterwards, so how long until they grow back? Because she's a girl.
Well, who gave consent?
Right? Exactly.
I'm waiting for that answer.
Because she can't just walk into the surgeon's office and say, hey, I need this procedure, right? So someone has to, there's a process, right?
The parents have to okay the gender affirming care, so-called. She also has to give informed consent, but again, it's not as black as white as it seems, because these parents are being told by the doctors, if you don't allow her to do this, she'll kill herself, which is not just manipulative, it's also it's evil and wrong. And I would actually also say in certain states, especially on the West Coast, there are now laws being enacted that say that, let's say your daughter comes to you and says she wants to undergo a chest surgery or a double mastectomy. If you tell her, no, honey, you got to wait until you're 18, she can go to the state, and this, it's complicated, but she can go to her counselor, and the counselor will help her come up with a reason why you were unfit to be her parent, and then she will be taken from your care.
That's a state law?
This is under state law in California, in Washington State, and all over the West Coast. I have parents that tell me about this. I reported on a very sad story of California taking a young girl out of her mother's care, putting her in the care of the state. The state got her started on testosterone, and this little girl threw herself in front of a train and ended her own life while on these drugs. And I spoke to her mother on the phone, and her mother sobbed to me and said, this was my baby girl. I don't know why they did this to her. And she told me, this is a pain that never goes away. And I know this sounds so terrible and dramatic, but it is. This is not just trivial.
And those stories are tough. I'm sorry, Wilmer, I didn't mean to step on you. I just want to know how many extreme cases are those. Because we've also seen successful cases of people that said, I'm glad, girls, guys, non-gender, binary, whichever lane they fall under, that said that they're happy with their decisions, and they wouldn't have gotten to those decisions without the love and support of some, their friends or family.
And I'll present it in the question of, is this an issue or is this a problem? And I draw the distinction. I go back to my other question about how many people are we talking about? Because there are a lot of issues that get presented in a political context. And then when you start to peel back the onion, what you find out is we're not really talking about a very big sample size here, and that this issue is being used to address other concerns. So,
well, we know social media is a concern.
Social media is a very strong concern.
No, I realize that. I realize that. So okay, what's the point here?
What's the point?
What's the point?
Well, I will tell you the point is, as a reporter, I know what our mainstream media, and we can call it whatever we want, establishment media, legacy, I like to say, these are like the outlets like the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, Politico. If you read a story on this topic, they use the words that they are given by the ACLU, the Human Rights Campaign, and GLAAD.
Target words.
They're euphemisms, I would actually say, such as gender affirming care. You notice that phrase has the word care in it, right? Mm-hmm. It's supposed to sound nice. It's supposed to sound loving. it's a euphemism for trans surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers. And the reason that they use it is because this is a very unattractive topic. Most Americans, when you poll them, don't support these procedures for kids. I think every reasonable person would say kids under 18 should not undergo irreversible surgeries that they can't actually consent to. Kids under the age of 18 should not be going on puberty blockers or hormones that are going to change their bone density, change their muscle structure, make them lose hair, make them grow hair, change their voices. Some of these girls can't scream anymore, they can't cry anymore, and they weren't able to consent to this stuff. But
So it sounds like they're also not as informed as they should be.
That's the problem.
Okay.
There's no explanation. And in my research from my book, I looked at a lot of these pro-transgender sites because I wanted to know, like, how are you advertising this? And they'll literally say, oh, you might have some mood swings, but it's not that bad. And yet the girls I talked to told me that they had such intense rage on testosterone that they had to physically externalize it. So they would punch walls. And one girl said her dad had her chop wood because she just was so rageful that she had to do something. There's a lot of other stories that are a little TMI that I'm not going to share right now.
So in your book, do you also talk to the ones that tried, thought about this process and then are saying they're happy they did not go through with it?
There's a lot of other books about them, and there's not books about detransitioners. So this project was about detransitioners, and part of the reason I did that is because I noticed that when these young people speak out, and let's keep in mind, like, it's not like they're telling us amazing story about how they won some victory. They're saying, I underwent a genital surgery, or I underwent a double mastectomy. My whole body has changed forever, and I realize that I am very unhappy now, and I'm telling you so that other kids don't do the same thing.
So wait a minute. So let me ask you this: are they still believing that is the young girl that came to her parents and said, I'm a boy, does she still believe she's a boy?
No.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think, and the reason for that is, so let's just say, I'm going to use the example of Chloe Cole. She's one of the most famous detransitioners, and she's in my book. Chloe underwent not only puberty blockers, and I should explain what that is. Their hormones.
I'm sorry. Can you tell us, was Chloe born a girl or a boy?
She's a girl.
She's a girl.
She's a biological
she's
girl.
A girl.
Yeah.
Okay. On both sides.
And so she went to her parents, said, I'm a boy. And so how did she?
Wait, I want to hear Chloe's story.
I'm getting there.
Did she change her name to Charles?
I'll tell you. So Chloe, she, as a young kid, she was feeling very, awkward in her body. She was on the autism spectrum, but she didn't know it. She wasn't diagnosed. She was lonely. She didn't feel like she fit in at school. She started to go through puberty, and she was really scared of puberty, as all kids are. But not a lot of kids know this nowadays. There's not a lot of understanding that everybody goes through this. So Chloe was struggling a lot, and she began finding gender content online, and all of this content was telling her, oh, you feel uncomfortable in your body, it's probably because you were born in the wrong one. Oh. So she thinks, great, I'm in the wrong body, that's a solution to my depression and anxiety. So she goes to her parents and says, I think I'm a boy, I gotta take these steps to become a boy. And her parents thought, no, you're not a boy, but they wanted to help her. So they took her to the doctor, and unfortunately they were told, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son? And so they went to an endocrinologist. They said, we got to get these hormones for our daughter, and they put her on puberty blockers. And puberty blockers, what they do is they stop your puberty. Mm-hmm. It sounds simple, but let's just say you're a little boy and you get put on puberty blockers, it stops your genitals from growing. Mm-hmm. So these little boys, for the rest of their lives, that's the situation. They have stunted genitalia. That's a horrible thing for, the parents are ultimately making that decision. Yeah. It affects, it will affect their sex life for the rest of their lives, and lots of other, more gruesome details there. But for Chloe, she just, as a young girl, it stops her puberty, and then they get her started on testosterone. It changes her body a lot. She doesn't like it. She's not liking the effects, but she's thinking, okay, this is just part of my journey. And then when she was 15, she went under the knife and got a double mastectomy and will never have breasts again. She will never be able to nurse her children. And I think for most of these detransitioners, the moment for them when they realize that things are not good is when they're on the other side of this surgery that's supposed to fix everything, right? Like, this is the point where you're supposed to finally feel comfortable in your own body. But it's not like you look like a boy. you have these massive black scars on your chest. They're scary to look at. You have to clean them. They don't heal quickly. It's gross. And she said that, once they started to heal, she started thinking, okay, I should feel better now. And she got to a point where she realized, I don't feel better. I'm not happy. And this was what had been promised to her. You will be happy if you can do this. And when she realized this, she said the castle in the air kind of came tumbling down, where she realized, oh, I've been lied to. They lied to me that I could become a boy. I clearly can't. They lied to me that I would be happier after this double mastectomy, but I'm not. They lied to me that I would look like a boy. I don't. And then she realized, oh my gosh, this is all a lot of different lies.
It was just puberty.
Yes. And so at that point, for her and for many other detransitioners, they're like, why would I believe anything I was told when you doctors and therapists have significantly changed my life for the worse? And then many of them are now back to their biological sex. They're dating people of the opposite sex, and they're speaking out because they want other young kids to understand puberty is just puberty. It doesn't mean that you're in the wrong body. And, their message is, wait, give yourself the gift of adolescence. Give yourself the gift of time to grow and to become a young person and figure out who you are later in life. And I think it's a really important message, and that's why I wrote this book, because nobody else was telling their stories. And I thought, what, they deserve a voice. We often see how the left will talk about empathy, and I thought, well, why don't we have empathy for them?
Right, empathy goes all around.
Yeah.
Why is this a left-right issue?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It is a really good question, right?
Yeah.
Because you would think, and I will say, as someone who covers gender and culture, I have seen an interesting dynamic here where, when it comes to abortion, which I cover all the time, those camps are very divided, right? It's left and right. But those camps have really united those advocates on both sides of the aisle to combat this issue, because I think so many people understand that this is not a partisan issue. This is about children. This is about protecting kids.
It's a human issue.
So I see pro-abortion advocates and pro-life advocates who normally don't like each other are coming together to help protect kids on this issue, and to pass legislation in states saying, kids under the age of 18 should be protected from these surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers. But what's crazy is our media, when they talk about it, they'll call those anti-trans laws. It's not anti-trans. It's protecting kids. But the media, you see what I mean? How it's all construed like that. So
How much of your research also included minorities or people of color?
that's an interesting question. I wasn't looking at this in terms of race. I was looking at it in terms of children and, who these stories were that I was encountering. And I will tell you, a lot of these girls who are transitioning are young white females. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that there's a social contagion aspect, specifically with social media and in schools. We used to see this with anorexia when I was in high school. Everybody was anorexic. And now a lot of these girls are identifying as transgender in groups. That's
the cult part of your book.
And I will say to you also,
Yeah.
an interesting part of this is these girls who are identifying as trans, they're partially attracted to this, and this is what I was told by these girls, because these activists are telling them, if you become part of this group, you will be part of a persecuted minority group. And they're saying, everyone hates us, everyone wants us dead. If you are part of this group, you are part of this, persecuted group. And they told me that when they identified as trans, they felt really special. They were like, we are special here, we are targeted, people want us dead. And then when they kind of came out of this cult-like group, they were realizing, oh my gosh.
You grow up and
Yeah.
you graduate high school and you
And they realized,
in high school I wanted to shave my head and get a tattoo. I had to wait for my mom. I got the tattoo.
I bet you're glad that you didn't shave your head.
Yeah.
But the same thing, I'm sure a lot of us are glad that we didn't, I have a girlfriend that told me, I'm really glad that I wasn't in high school at this time, because I might have gotten a double mastectomy and never been able to breastfeed my own children. It's this horrible, horrible space and time where tomboys, girls who are tomboys, are not really allowed to exist anymore. They're put in these boxes and forced to, choose their gender and their sexuality, when a lot of them haven't even kissed anyone yet, held hands with a boy.
It's very complicated, and to your point, there's the transgender laws, there are the social media laws, there's healthcare, right? That all of that plays into the information or disinformation that affects the
Right.
D-trans
Absolutely.
and those that and parents that need more education.
Absolutely.
Where can we? Okay, tell us where we can find your book.
It's on Amazon. It's called D-Trans, True Stories of Escaping the Gender Ideology Cult. It's also at Target and Walmart. And if you want to follow my work, it's on, I post a lot on Twitter or X at Mary Marg Olahan, or you can find it at dailysignal.com.
Great. How long did it take you to do it? The research.
Oh, I did this in 6 months, and I should have taken longer.
Great.
Should have asked your parents.
I know.
Mary Margaret, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Have a great convention.
Okay.